Hello and welcome back to the Edge of the Box podcast, a podcast by WhoScored.com in association with Oddschecker. I'm your host, Dan Bardell, joined by George Elek and Jonathan Wilson to look through this week's Premier League weekend. And we're bringing back an old feature at the start of the show. I've got some trivia. If you don't get it straight away, we'll leave it and we'll head through the show. But bearing in mind that Vicario at the moment is probably the Premier League's best goalkeeper, Italian, obviously. I know Jonathan disagrees. Okay, let's set a 4-1 goalkeeper. He was good on Monday, even though he let in 4. He was good on Monday. Vicario, obviously Italian. There are 3 other Italian goalkeepers that have played in the Premier League. Can you name them?
Vito Mannone.
Yes, that was the hardest one, and you got that first. That's not a great start for me.
Well, he played for Sunderland, so
I know. I knew you'd get it.
My head's just full of Vito Mannone and that performance at Manchester City in the Great Escape season.
Is that always the case, or is that just on the show?
Yeah, always. Yeah.
Do you want a bit of time, and we'll come back to later on in the show?
I mean, everyone else scream at their phones.
Let's look ahead to Bournemouth against Newcastle then. Eddie Howe returns to Bournemouth. I came up with a little idea at the start of the week. Hopefully you've both been informed of this idea. If you were to pick a top 5 Premier League managers, Jonathan, would Eddie Howe feature in your top 5?
Guardiola, Klopp, clearly.
Yeah, that was my top 2.
Yeah.
If it's purely on this season, you've got to say Postecoglou.
No, that's generally managers. Generally, you can look at the body of work over the years in the Premier League. Let's say, or anywhere else. In fact,
Arteta, probably Thomas Frank.
Top 5.
Yeah,
Done a great job.
To say Brentford from the Championship into the Premier. Because it's all glitzy, it's all Europe.
No, I'm just surprised.
I think Thomas Frank's been absolutely brilliant. I don't see how anybody could have done that job better.
I mean, I assume Dan's number 3 is probably going to be Unai, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, just look at what he's won over the years and what he's done at Villa. That's why. Based on I've based mine quite heavily on trophies, so I've put him 3rd.
Well, if you're going on trophies, Eddie Howe's miles away because he hasn't won one.
Yeah. Well, I said mainly, not fully.
I think you haven't drawn up the parameters of this very well.
I think Pochettino has to be in there. Has to be. You can't let recency bias cloud what he did both at Southampton, where he took over a side threatened by relegation, had their highest ever points tally, and then went to Tottenham and turned a team perennial underachievers, took them to the brink of the Premier League, took them to the Champions League final. I know that PSG wasn't great, and I know that things are obviously bad at Chelsea right now, but that doesn't change what is an incredible body of work. So I've got him 4th, Arteta 5th. I got Howe 3rd, even though I'd probably say that maybe as tacticians, you'd have Pochettino, you'd have Arteta, and you'd probably have Emery above him. I think in terms of what he's achieved, where not only has he taken this Newcastle side and turned them into one of the best teams in the Premier League over a short space of time, he also took over Bournemouth when they were about to get relegated into non-league and took them to the Premier League. That is probably the best, most transformative one-club managerial reign in my lifetime, I would say. So you can't ignore, if it wasn't for Eddie Howe, Bournemouth wouldn't even be in the position they're in or anywhere near it. They could be, like Chesterfield basically right now. So I think for that reason, he has to feature. He's managed, if you get rid of Burnley, he's managed 2 clubs. And so far the upward curve for both of them has been so steep. It's not even a curve, just a line.
I'd agree with that. So I think we've got Pep and Klopp are locks, 1 and 2 for everyone, obviously. Then I've got Emery 3rd, Howe 4th, and Arteta 5th. That's what I've got. So I haven't put Poch in there, which is basically it was a throw up between him and Poch and Arteta. I went with the fact that Arteta has won an FA Cup. That seemed to be my deciding factor if I couldn't choose between two people. But I just think the job that Eddie Howe has done in the Premier League with Bournemouth and now with Newcastle, Jonathan, really, probably people thought Eddie Howe might be at the coming towards the end of his cycle at Newcastle. The fact that they've qualified for the Champions League, people are always saying, "Oh, they'll be looking to get someone bigger in. They'll be looking to get in a bigger name manager, someone with European pedigree." But why? Because what he has done is absolutely staggering, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an assumption that new owners with lots of money want people who are glamorous, which is what we've seen in Birmingham, for instance. And so I think there was a sense that Howe was, Premier League proven stopgap till they got in a position where they could attract a much bigger name. But that's the assumption you're making about people with loads of money. And Newcastle's owners, like City's owners, actually seem to be pretty restrained in what they can spend. Restrained in what they spend, and pretty sensible in the people they bring in. So, Newcastle started the season. There was that little wobble where they have 3 draws in a row, I think. And you start to think, oh, I wonder if there's a bit of pressure. I wonder if this is the moment when they'll act. But they haven't. And you look at Newcastle now, and despite all the injuries, and their injury list is ludicrous, they're still going really well. So I don't think... I mean, the notion you come under pressure, I suppose, if they say they lose to Chelsea in the Carabao Cup quarter, say they go out of the Cup in the 3rd or 4th round, say they finish 4th in their Champions League group and suddenly lose 3 or 4 league games in a row in January, February, maybe there is pressure, but I don't think there's any sort of realistic prospect of that. So you would say from now it'd be a big surprise if he wasn't in position next summer. And then presumably there'll be another pot of cash to spend and they start another phase of the cycle.
Yeah, people almost scoff at Newcastle. They've got loads of money, they've spent loads of money. But the fact they are in the Champions League with some of the players that they have in their squad, George, I mean, Eddie Howe has improved players that have not really ever done anything for Newcastle, and that's throughout the whole squad. If you look at them, and everyone that comes into that system, they know what they're doing. And he's almost just galvanised the whole city and the whole club. Eddie Howe, I was sitting there the other night watching the Dortmund game, and okay, they lost, but I actually don't think he gets the credit at all for the fact that they're even playing in the Champions League. 2 years ago, those players, a lot of them were toiling under Steve Bruce, and yes, they brought players in. But I think it's absolutely amazing that they're even playing in the Champions League.
It's also worth pointing out that some of the players that they brought in have kind of been mocked to an extent. Like Anthony Gordon came in. Football Twitter was like, hold on, they're spending that much on him. Like, he's terrible. And look how, he's been a revelation for them this season. Also with Dan Burn, not necessarily a player that you'd anticipate a Champions League chasing side are going to go and bring in at age 30 as he was then. And he's been so reliable. So, yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying when speaking about ranking the managers, is that when it's easy to focus on who's the most innovative tactician, who's the one who's kind of reinventing the game in the way that certainly Pep Guardiola has. And I think that there's an argument that Mikel Arteta is doing some stuff that is incredibly exciting on that side of things. And with Eddie Howe, Newcastle press incredibly effectively. They use the width very well. But it's more a case of player development. And I think that's often really overlooked when people judge managers and coaching staffs. Let's not forget Jason Tindall in this conversation. He wouldn't want us to, for sure. But also that, as a management group, as a coaching group, I can't really remember many occasions where it's just so clear to see each player's individual performances improve to such an extent, and how consistently, they've been ravaged by injuries. And yet it doesn't really seem to matter who comes in. They raise their game up to a new level, which previously he's the one we often talk about. But like Jacob Murphy couldn't get into a really poor Newcastle side. And suddenly he's now an incredibly reliable attacking performer for a team who are currently in the Champions League and look likely to finish there again this season. Like, it is incredible. And I think if you're an owner of a football club, it's probably the most valuable thing that you can do, that you can hire in a manager, is getting someone in who's effectively going to polish a turd. He's going to take players who had little to no value previously and turn them into not only effective players on the football pitch, but players who you can actually probably recoup some money for if it came to selling them. So, yeah, he's it's remarkable what he's able to do. And it's also, when you look at what happened at Bournemouth as well, where the amount of players at Bournemouth who are incredibly consistent, good performers for Eddie Howe, once he left, they really toiled. Yeah, it's something that seems to be consistent with him and is incredibly valuable to what Newcastle are doing.
Yeah, sorry about the place when you were talking there, George. My microphone decided to disconnect again with massive. So I was pulling.
It was also exactly when I said the word turd as well. So I thought that was why.
No, you can say turd as much as you like on this podcast.
I do think as well though. So this is going to sound like I'm trying to diminish the job Eddie Howe's done, which I'm not. But I do think those players were never that bad. There was
Steve Bruce definitely helps.
Whatever you think of Steve Bruce as a manager, and possibly by that stage he'd run his course, and his ideas maybe were slightly behind the what the leading teams were doing, and the general mood of misery and frustration in the latter days of Mike Ashley, I think they dragged down play. So look at Jonathan, who clearly was a good player in Germany. Maybe they slightly overspent on him. Comes in, nobody quite knows what his position is. He's been bounced about in the team. It's a team that's lacking confidence. He becomes a sort of emblem of the sort of waste and the decline and the poverty of ideas of the Ashley era. And actually, he's a perfectly good footballer. And yeah, Howe has probably got him playing slightly above his level, but I don't think his level was ever quite as low as it looked in the years before Howe got there. And you look at something like Jamal Lascelles, who I think has always been a pretty good footballer. So yeah, I mean Jacob Murphy again, sort of a talented kid who just found it difficult to play in that environment. So I think the two sides both work there.
Yeah, the list endless. Like Cher was completely cast aside, and Eddie Howe pulled him back in, and now he's a massive part of a really strong back four. That's probably one of the best back fours when everyone's fit in the Premier League. Even Joe Linton. I take on board completely what you're saying, Jonathan. Eddie Howe's put him in a position where he never really, no one had ever put him there before. He never played there, but Eddie Howe identified some strengths within him that he thought.
No, absolutely, yeah.
It's just good management all round. The fact that he can improve the players that are there. He's got their fitness up, so they're capable of doing what he wants them to do, and he's also improved the players that they've brought in as well, because they haven't really brought in some people who you'd say, oh, he's the finished article coming into the club. They've brought in players with room to grow, I would say. Well,
I think they're in a maybe we'll see this more over the next year or two. I wonder just how. It's not so much how deep their pockets are; it's how deep FFP allows their pockets to be. I wonder if there are constraints there. I wonder as well, and obviously I say this as somebody from the area, so I feel I am allowed to say this, but I think there's definitely a category of player who looks at the Northeast and doesn't see the incredible landscape and the great history and the tremendous people, just thinks that's a long way from Europe and would rather move to London. And maybe Manchester, Liverpool, because of the greater recent history. And by recent history, I mean the last 85 years, 95 years, has an appeal that Newcastle doesn't. I wonder if there is still a slight sort of reluctance on the part of some players to move to Newcastle.
Just to finish then, this little section, we've done the whole podcast on it so far, this section on Eddie Howe. What was your top five? Because then we'll put all the top fives on social media and get the pundits out there on X to vote.
That sounds like an absolute disaster.
Can you mute me out the conversation? Don't link me in the conversation. That sounds just like annoying.
It's not up to me.
Pep first, Klopp second, Howe third, Poch fourth, Arteta fifth.
Okay, so mine was Pep, Klopp, Emery, Howe, Arteta. That was me.
Guardiola, Klopp, Frank, Poch, Howe.
That's interesting. I don't begrudge you putting Thomas Frank in there at all, and you've justified why you didn't. I just wasn't expecting anyone to put him in the top 5 Premier League managers this morning whilst we're recording. So,
and the thing is,
you may well break the internet.
What's happened there is I will not get the votes because Brentford don't have as many fans. You've gone for the easy options, the popular options, cheap. And I hope you're proud of yourself.
I mean,
Spurs fans are going to love Poch being on mine and not Ange.
It's just the body of work isn't as big in the Premier League. So, to be fair, by that notion, Jonathan putting Thomas Frank in there is completely fair because his body of work with Brentford is huge. But on Eddie Howe, transformed Bournemouth, and I think he has transformed Newcastle as well. They're not necessarily where they are now with any other manager, and I just think the job that he's done is absolutely staggering. People thought that Newcastle might losing Botman, getting the sales in, that would be a problem. The fact they hadn't really upgraded their centre halves, their centre half like pecking order in the summer, Jonathan. But actually, Lascelles has done really well. I know they lost against Dortmund. It wasn't like they were completely blown away, but by them, and the injuries are absolutely killing them at the moment. But Lascelles
the injury list
been good.
The injury is ridiculous. I mean, Murphy, Byrne, Barnes, Anderson, Botman, Isak, Manquillo, Target, Tonali obviously not injured but not available. I think Guimaraes is suspended for this weekend, and Callum Wilson's a doubt for this weekend. So that's how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's a full team. That's 11. And there's no goalkeeper, so you wouldn't play that team, not even in the Carabao Cup away at Old Trafford.
They probably could play that team and still win at the Carabao Cup at Old Trafford.
But yeah, I mean, but Lascelles was always a good player. Like, you know, I also think this comes back to a point that I feel I make a lot. I think a lot, you know, there's not a big difference between most of the players in most of the Premier League clubs. They're all quite a similar standard. What makes them into an 8 out of 10 player rather than a 6 out of 10 player is the environment, and whether they feel comfortable and confident, whether they've got a system that suits them. And that's the hardest thing in football to get right. You can have a brilliant player, put him in a brilliant team, and it just doesn't click for whatever reason. We all thought Lukaku would work at Chelsea. It seemed logical. It seemed to work.
They were going to win the league.
And it just went horribly wrong for whatever reason. The clash of personalities with Tuchel, or tactically didn't quite gel. And that's really hard. That's the hardest thing of recruitment. It's not identifying talent is quite easy. Identifying the right talent is the really hard bit. And I think Lascelles is just one of those players who found things maybe a little bit difficult towards the end of the Steve Bruce reign. But I don't think he was ever a bad player, and now he's got his chance again. Do I think he's as good as Botman? Probably not, but he's doing a very, very good job in Botman's absence. So he deserves credit for that, and it's great for Newcastle they got the extra option.
Yeah, we're starting to see a few players as well that we haven't seen much of this season. Lewis Hawley was taken off at half-time, but he started against Dortmund, and Livramento was Newcastle's best performance, so they might well find a way to get him in the team against Bournemouth. So let's talk Bournemouth, George. We spoke about them a few weeks ago. I think we all kind of agreed that they need to give the manager a little bit more time. Has that win against Burnley bided him a bit of time? He'll probably be forgiven for what happens against Newcastle in the game after is Sheffield United. That'll probably be quite decisive, like the Burnley game. But has that victory taken the pressure off a little bit? Well, that's a stupid question, isn't it? Obviously it has, but how much time has that given him?
Yeah, I'm not sure there was necessarily overwhelming pressure on him before that. I mean, obviously there was pressure in terms of they need to get results, but it didn't feel to me like he was imminently going to get sacked. And I think over the last few weeks in the betting for the next manager to get sacked, it was always Heckingbottom who was odds-on favourite rather than Iraola ever taking that spot. So it definitely helps. I mean, I think it's worth pointing out that Bournemouth's fixtures have been really tough. Like, they've already had City away, they've had Liverpool away, they've had Brighton away, they've also played Spurs and Arsenal at home, and they picked up 0 points from those 5 games. But they are, 5 teams we anticipate will be vying for the very least for the top 4. So the fixtures haven't been particularly easy. Down towards the bottom end, they've only played 1 team at home, currently occupying the bottom 5 spots, and that's Burnley, who they beat. So there are easier games to come. This clearly isn't one of them, but I'm sure the way that the Bournemouth work, and I think even though they're embroiled in it right now, given the issues with other teams down towards the bottom, I'd be very surprised if we saw them not give Iraola a chance to implement. And also, we know, from when he came in, that his playing philosophy is very different to what we saw last season from Bournemouth, and I'm sure he'll be given time to try and implement that as well. So, a really important result. Great also to see Alex Scott winning a lot of plaudits for Bournemouth, a player they brought in from Bristol City in the summer. He is mega. I don't think he'll be at Bournemouth for long. I think they'll be able to keep the big fish at bay, but he's a player to watch out for. I'm sure will continue to improve as he plays more minutes.
Yeah, everyone's saying at the moment, George, there's only 4 teams that are going to be involved in the relegation dogfight. I disagree with that slightly, because there is always a few teams that go on runs and fall down. I do think the teams in the bottom 4 are capable of picking results up at some point during the season. But what are odds checker? What are the odds saying about that? How are they reflecting?
Yeah, I mean, the odds kind of reflect the idea that there are clearly 4 teams most likely to go down. Sheffield United are 1-6, so 6 on for relegation. Bournemouth 1-4. So you can see there that both of those sides given little chance of staying up. Burnley are 5-6, so just favourites to go down, with Bournemouth 13-8. So those two kind of the two sides of the coin. And then Everton are the next shortest at 4-1, which gives them kind of a 20% chance of relegation, with Fulham 17-2, Wolves 10-1. So, 10-1 shots win. So, I wouldn't be ruling it out, but there's no, as you say, at this moment, it's very much the case of those four. The poorest teams are likely to go down, but we've seen plenty of teams in the past go on long losing runs, and those teams I just mentioned are definitely susceptible to that. And I also think Luton's performances at home gives them a massive chance. Even though they haven't picked up loads of points at home, they're yet to be beaten by more than a goal. They came very close to beating Liverpool last time out, and their XG numbers are really good at home. And it feels to me like if they can maintain that level of performance at Kenilworth Road, then they're going to pick up plenty of points, which will make it difficult for the likes of Bournemouth to ease themselves clear.
I guess the reason Everton are, do you say fifth favourites to go down?
Yeah.
Is the possibility of them having points deducted, and we just don't know how that's going to go. I mean, I think in terms of how well they're playing now, they should be okay. But obviously, if they suddenly get deducted 8, 10, 12 points, that's a very different equation. And I think the other thing you'd say, of the bottom four sides, they don't seem to have played each other very much. I think the only game between any of the bottom four sides has been Luton v Burnley. I think is that true? I mean, Bournemouth still have to play Sheffield United and Luton and Fulham in the first half of the season. They haven't played any of them yet. Sheffield United definitely haven't played any of the other members of the bottom four. So that means Luton haven't played at least two of them. So Burnley's the only one they have played. So there's points that they have to get there, which will make that gap look less. I think Fulham are in a bit of bother. I think they could easily slide. There's been at least 2 Saudi attempts to entice Marco Silva. I do wonder, particularly if say money isn't available in January, how willing he'll be to stick with Fulham, given Mitrovic has gone. If Palhinha goes in January as well, I think Fulham could easily get dragged in. But I also think that there would have been more pressure on Iraola had it not been that the 3 promoted sides are all doing so badly. But the oddity is, I mean, I know there's all these rumours going around Heckingbottom, but kind of what's the point of sacking him? We haven't had we haven't had a managerial departure yet, have we?
No, nothing
this season. No. I think it's entirely possible we get to Christmas without one, because I don't think it's pressure on Iraola. I think Burnley are so invested in company that they're unlikely to make a change in the near future. Rob Edwards is clearly doing as well as is realistically possible at Luton. So where do you see that? Where is the axe likely to fall? And it's not at the bottom. Maybe Ten Hag, but with the Jim Ratcliffe thing, presumably they wait for Jim Ratcliffe to turn up unless things go really bad and really toxic. So after a record number of sackings last season, I think we may end up having very, very few this.
I was thinking about this the other day. I think there's never been a time in the Premier League when so many clubs have kind of got their ideal manager. If that makes sense. I think if you look through the board, you've just mentioned the teams at the bottom. If you look at some of the teams at the top as well, Man City, Liverpool, Villa, Brighton, Spurs, Arsenal, all pretty much got the perfect manager. You could argue that Poch will turn into being the perfect manager for Chelsea as well with all their young players. So I think you are right. I think one with the question mark over him at the moment in the whole entirety of the league for me is Ten Hag. Marco Silva may well up and leave, but again, he's probably the perfect manager for Fulham at the moment with the job he's done. I just think if you look throughout, there's so many ideal managers in jobs at clubs at the moment.
But the issue with that, and the reason why we see so many sackings now, is that there's just no nuance given to managerial performance. Like these days, you could get a league of 20, the Premier League. All 20 managers could probably do a 9 out of 10 job, and 3 of them would probably still get sacked because naturally 3 teams are going to get relegated. So even though right now it might feel that way in November, I can promise you that by the nature of the league, meaning that some of those teams who feel like they should be pushing for Europe are going to end up being in 14th or 15th, maybe by no fault of the manager themselves, just by the nature of the fact that it's a strong division this season, will end up meaning that the even if their stock is high now, the daggers will be out from fans and their job will come under threat. So, yeah, it feels like that at the moment. But you look through the Premier League table now, whether it's Gary O'Neill at Wolves, who's obviously made a popular start, but if they don't pull away from the relegation zone, will there be questions asked of him? Moyes at West Ham, who last season we saw, if it wasn't for Europe, he probably would have gone. There are definitely a couple in there.
Steve
Cooper, of course, yeah. I mean, there are definitely some in that bracket where if they're still in the bottom half of that table and not away from relegation, then there's no denying that their job will come under threat.
You mentioned Steve Cooper. I was at the City Ground on Sunday, obviously watching Villa get beat by Forest, and that's one of the best home atmospheres I've ever been in the away end, and that all their songs are geared around how much they love Stevie Cooper. So Forest would be, I think that the fans would be in uproar if they got rid of Steve Cooper. If you had
they definitely would be now, and also in fairness to their fans, they stuck by him last season as well when they didn't.
They love him.
Well.
They love him.
I don't think it's not a fan issue there, is it? It's an owner issue.
No, that's
issue.
true. Yeah, that is true. If you had to pick the next manager to go now, who would you pick? And we'll revisit this when the first manager goes. Ten Hag. George?
So Ten Hag in, say, February.
Okay. So you think that'll be the next one? Will be February?
Well, I mean, to be sacked. I mean, I think, as I say, I think Marcus Silva could be lured away by Saudi Arabia.
Okay, let's just go. Let's keep it to sackings then. You think Ten Hag?
Ten Hag, so January or February,
Ten
depending when the takeover happens.
Okay, interesting. George?
Ten Hag is the 6-4 favourite to go. I think Heckingbottom still looks like a bet to me at 5-2, just because there's been it's a proper no smoke without fire pick. There's too many rumours over the last few weeks that he's on the brink.
Okay, I'll mix it up and I'm going to throw David Moyes in there just because I think if West Ham do go
25-1.
Really, I just think if they go on a run of losing games, I think patience will be thin. Although I think who West Ham then going to go and get? That's the other thing. I don't know. Can't really think of it. No one's leaping out at me as other than Potter, the manager that's around at the moment and available for work. I'll just be different. And I'll
Hansi Flick hasn't got a job, has he?
No, can't see him coming.
I'm not saying he's a natural fit for West Ham, but he's the obvious sort of big name, sort of floating around.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, if Moyes is the next one at 25-1, and I haven't put a bet on it, I'm going to be absolutely devastated. But yeah,
you know what to do.
Yeah, interesting conversation.
Go on, Odds-checker.
Yeah, go on, Odds-checker. That wasn't a plan to talk about that, but we've kind of just gone into it naturally. So
easy segue.
Good chat. Nice little segue there. Right, then let's get our score predictions for Bournemouth against Newcastle. George, I'll let you go first.
I have got Bournemouth 1, Newcastle 1. I think Newcastle are tired.
On 1. Yeah, they've obviously got players missing. I've still gone for 2-0 to Newcastle. I think they'll have a lot to get, just enough, to get over the line. If Callum Wilson doesn't play, I actually really like Anthony Gordon as a centre forward. I think his movement as a number 9 is absolutely brilliant. Jonathan?
I've split the difference, gone 2-1 Newcastle.
2-1, so yeah. Some different predictions there. Wasn't a good week for me last week in the predictions league. Only 3 points. That's absolutely pathetic, and I do feel like I'm bottling it a little bit at the moment. Jonathan and Sam got 5, and Georgia on the rise with 7 last week. So
5. Just to be clear, this is Sam. I've never got as low as 5. What is going on?
Absolutely rubbish, Sam, isn't it? So yeah, so you're 67 points, third at the moment, George. Jonathan and Sam, you've got 77 points on the graphic. It's just Jonathan's head, so you're taking the credit for last week's 5. And I'm top with 91, but I only got 3 points last week, which is absolute.
So I'm on 77, so I'm 14 behind. If I had a clear 2 or 3 weeks of just me picking, you'd be in trouble, son.
Why don't you just message Sam your picks and insist? Yeah, pull rank.
I don't want to undermine the young man.
I didn't hear. Did he have 2 weeks in a row at one point as well?
Yeah.
So I think you might have missed 2 weeks in a row of your predictions. I mean, you're a prediction stalwart. You've been.
Yeah, I was in Romania, so I couldn't do it.
Okay.
Whereabouts in Romania?
I flew into Cluj and then drove down to Bucharest. So
I've been to Cluj before.
Cluj, Hunedoara, Sibiu, Sighișoara, Brașov, Bucharest.
Wow, nice. There's a great rooftop bar in Cluj.
I was only in Cluj for one night, and we trying to think where we ate that night. Ate really well. Transylvanian food is excellent. Really, you can recommend it.
Super work from George, who tells us strictly we need to be done in an hour. Then
what's your favourite bar in Transylvania?
I mean, if we're asking Jonathan questions, I was scrolling Twitter or X the other day and saw some great acting of you eating a kebab, Jonathan.
It wasn't. It was a falafel wrap.
Sorry, a falafel, not a kebab.
Yeah, I was in Sweden for a weekend doing a piece on because the Swedish league's the only one of the top 32 in Europe not to have VAR. And they've got quite a sort of vibrant fan culture, so it was a bit of a throwback. And obviously, because they don't have the money to compete in terms of transfers, they're sort of very much pitching the league as this is old school. This is where it's all about fans. And it was nice to go. It was quite enjoyable. I don't really understand ultras. I've never really got them, despite 20 years of trying.
You're not part of the Sunderland ultras.
No, I just don't. What I don't get. And like this is true of Sweden, Germany, Italy, all these countries have a big sort of ultra scene. That the noise is great, but it doesn't change during the game. They just do their 90-minute routine, and there's very little sort of reaction to what's going on the pitch. And you sort of feel, well, they're not really here for the football, are they? They could be doing that like a bandstand in a park. It's the football's totally incidental to it, which I find very odd. But anyway.
I'll be going to Villa Alkmaar tonight, and I imagine the ultras will be there.
Yeah,
very choreographed. It is lively, but I agree that it's quite.
I don't mind that for 10 minutes around kickoff. It's like there's a terrible challenge in the 27th minute, and nobody reacts to it because they're halfway through a song.
Choreographed, yeah. Jonathan's part of the falafel ultras.
That was a great falafel. It was. I hope I came across in the video. I really enjoyed that.
It didn't come across genuine at all in that video. Like you've been paid to say it, or got a gun to your head to say how much you enjoying the falafel.
Well,
I'm not a falafel fan.
I was literally being paid to do the video, but the falafel was genuinely good.
Okay, maybe we can plan.
Nominative determinism falafel, I think.
I'm going to call you on the trivia now. Have you come up with the other clues?
I forgot about it.
I do have them both. Yeah.
Go on then, Jonathan.
Kudaccini and Taibi.
Kudaccini, yeah.
Yeah, it's all well and good saying it after Jonathan said Kudaccini.
I was trying to say both at the same time, but I missed the second one, so we'll just move on.
It's like my mum reckons she's really good at quizzes when on TV. I remember when I was younger, she'd be watching the Weakest Link, and she'd start saying it after the contestant had answered, like she knew what she was saying, and then she'd look at me and just go. She got it right, but she was just copying what they were saying. Right, we've gone on a lot of tangents when George has got to go. Not good for the podcast. Let's look at Chelsea v Manchester City then. And Jonathan, Doku is top of the Who Scored form rankings. Absolutely stupendous week last week, involved in most of the goals. Just seems to be allowed to play Doku, because I'm sure if he was doing anything he shouldn't be, Pep wouldn't be picking him, but he just looks like he's really enjoying his football, and he's kind of a free spirit on the wing for City.
Yeah, I mean, you always wonder with Guardiola whether there's wheels within wheels, because Doku is not playing in the way that we've really seen any winger play for Guardiola's side before. Maybe bits of early Mahrez, but we know that Guardiola is obsessed by control, and Doku does not give you control. I mean, he's the way he can dribble on either foot seemingly equally well, I think is remarkable. Must be incredibly difficult to defend against. He's very good at doing that sort of stop and start again. So you think of was it the first goal one of the goals against Brighton anyway, where it was Pascal Gross he does. Just stops. No, it was Igor. So stops and then goes again, and so he can go either way. He can stop and go. As a dribbler, he's brilliant. His end product at the minute clearly is brilliant. But I do wonder why he's not going through the same process of reprogramming that Jack Grealish went through. And we'll find out in time, I guess, whether Guardiola is sort of letting him play. And sort of building his confidence up and sort of thinking, this is fine against a Bournemouth. I think it's interesting Grealish started against Manchester United, that the more serious game, they play the more conservative player. I think the stats show pretty clearly that when opponents have attacked City, it tends to have been down the City left, Doku's side. Doku, actually, his tackling stats are pretty good, but I still think because he loses the ball quite a lot, it does render whoever the left fullback, whether it's Ake or whether it's Guardiola, it does leave them a bit vulnerable. They can be isolated. So, yeah, if it was anybody other than City, we wouldn't be talking about this. We'd be just saying Doku is brilliant. What an amazing start. Because it's Guardiola, you sort of think, that doesn't conform to the sort of slightly counterintuitive way that we know Guardiola likes to operate. How is that going to play out against Liverpool in a couple of weeks? Maybe even against Chelsea on Sunday. How is it going to play out in the quarterfinal, semi-final of the Champions League? But as I say, it may be that he's just letting Doku play at the minute because he thinks they'll win the games anyway. It's a good way of saying to Grealish, not that keen on the way you celebrated the treble. Maybe you want to rein that in a bit. Maybe don't think your place is secure. And it may be that Grealish comes back in as the season goes on and Doku does undergo that process of reprogramming.
Well, in terms of dribbles per 90, if we look at City players under Pep, Doku is far and away top with 4.9 dribbles per 90. The player underneath him in second is Leroy Sané in 17-18, 3.2. So this is not.
Well, and look at what happened to Sané.
Wasn't it that he wanted to go to Bayern?
I think there's a reason why he wanted to go, though, which was he felt he was being curtailed.
In hamstring.
There was a sort of friction, definitely, between Sané and Guardiola.
Yeah, it's a massive drop, though, isn't it? 4.9 down to 3.2. And Doku has made a sensational start to the Premier League life.
Is there also an argument here that with Kevin De Bruyne out, they are clearly two very, very different footballers, albeit both pretty effective. But De Bruyne's role within that City team is basically he's the only one who doesn't have to play by the constraints of what Pep wants, both in and out of possession. So with De Bruyne not in there, is there room for another player just to have a bit of a free role, effectively? Like even if he does play on the left hand side and all shifts around, like if it's Bernardo playing where De Bruyne normally plays on the right hand side of the three, then you've got a player there who's way more disciplined in what he does than De Bruyne was. So therefore, you open up the kind of mechanism for there to be someone who's allowed to express themselves. Like it does seem weird how normally it takes time for these players who come in at City to understand what's asked of them. Like if you look at the player that Grealish is now compared to what he was at Villa, like they're very, very different players. But Doku, even at a young age, has come in and basically just been told, go and do what you like.
Also, I guess, is Pep just so happy with his defence now, Jonathan? The system he's got where quite a lot of the time he'll play 3 or 4 centre backs, so auxiliary defenders really as defenders. Is it just that he's now so happy with his defence that they can afford to have a player doing the things that Doku just let off the leash?
I think there's a truth to the fact that the fullbacks are not as attacking as they were, certainly not on the left.
Yeah, Cancelo used to play there, didn't they?
Yeah, and Walker still does get forward on the right. So yeah, it may be that because there's less need to sort of integrate with the attacking fullback, and your Grealish was constantly having to integrate with Cancelo. And I think what he found really difficult about that is the Grealish, when he dribbles, is quite right-footed. And so he likes to come inside, and Cancelo also goes inside. So Cancelo was often in Grealish's space, and that creates a slight clogging effect. Whereas if you don't have the left back overlapping or underlapping, then you have got a more solid platform, and maybe the player on that side does have a slightly freer role. So yeah, I mean, it's Guardiola's got such a sort of sense of a balance of his team. That I think both that and the point George makes about De Bruyne may influence his thinking on that. But again, I think we'll see the true measure of it in I think the next couple of weeks is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, let's look at Chelsea then. Unbelievable game on Monday night at Tottenham Hotspur. I'm not sure how good Chelsea actually were, but they won 4-1. They've only lost 1 game in 7 matches now, George. Is Poch starting to get a handle on what his best team is, etc. at Chelsea?
Maybe. I mean, it sounds weird to say it, but I almost came away from that game less convinced that Chelsea are going to come good than I was before. I think there was a weird...
I'm exactly the same. Even though Jackson scored a hat-trick, I came away from that game less convinced that he's a good player.
I actually thought he was all right in the first half. I thought he linked play pretty well.
At all.
You've got to... there are always going to be 2 types of strikers. I said it before on the show. Like, he's got the kind of Cavani knack of being in the right place at the right time. And then even if you can't finish, you're probably going to score a few goals just by measure of being able to have that pace and behind and the movement in the box. He's just got to stop leaning backwards whenever he shoots. It was a bizarre... I couldn't sleep after that game. I was like buzzing off the back of it. It was just It was like watching a horror film and then trying to go to bed afterwards. It was mad, mayhem. Is he getting to grips with it? Possibly. It was a weird. I do kind of feel in a way for Chelsea in that second half. Like when you're used to playing against 10 men, you're used to playing against a low block, and it's all about keeping the ball, moving the ball, trying to tire out the opposition whilst also looking for the holes. It's not very often that you play against 9 men who employ a ridiculously high line, and it seemed to take them about 25 minutes to work out. You've basically got to advance the ball right up against that line and then try and play through your striker who has a complete pace advantage over the and when they did that, they scored 3 very quickly. We'll see. I still think that Chelsea will be okay. I think probably getting 3 goals into Jackson is going to be a good thing, and Nkunku's still to come back, albeit maybe the confidence that Jackson built up was extinguished when he smashed one over the bar in the 98th minute to try and make it 4, try and get his 4th. So he's getting there with his what team he wants. Reece James' return is obviously important. It still feels like the Enzo, Caicedo, Gallagher trio is a little bit clunky. Enzo's a brilliant passer, but it feels like they need someone who's just got that slightly more creative spark, who can create in tight spaces, rather than Enzo, whose long passing is great, Caicedo knits things together, and then Gallagher, who's just a bit of a battering ram.
Yeah, I've got to say I've been impressed with Gallagher in recent weeks. Also been impressed with Cole Palmer, Jonathan, and it is, of course, the Cole Palmer derby this weekend. It already feels like he's become quite important. I think when everyone in the game felt like they were losing their head at one point, Palmer was that one bit of calm on the pitch, I felt.
Yeah, and I think that's been true all season, actually. I think since he came into the team, sort of 5 or 6 games into the season, he's the one who just seems to be looking around going, why is this mad? Just stop doing mad things. Just sort of, if you've got the ball 8 yards in front of the goal, just kick it in the goal. It's not that hard. The fact he grabbed that penalty, he seems to have a sort of a ruthlessness that is otherwise lacking at Chelsea. And I agree. I think on Monday, what I thought was what I thought that Postecoglou was doing was playing that high line to mess with Chelsea's heads. That he'd looked at their forward line and thought, that's not a forward line that can think on its feet. It's short on confidence, and we'll mess with them. And then as soon as they start to work out, have a runner from deep, 2 or 3 passes hit the runner, which they finally did sort of 70 minutes, 75 minutes. That Kukurea chance was the first time I actually did that. I thought he'd then drop back to something more orthodox, and then he didn't. And I thought, because at the time I was thinking, this is brilliant. He's realised psychologically he's sort of breaking them psychologically. And it was a bit like, and I don't know anything about rugby, so what I'm about to say may not make sense. But do you remember when England played Italy, I think it was 2017, when Italy refused to challenge any ball on the ground? So a ruck was never formed, there was never an offside line, which meant that Italy could go and challenge the fullback. And people who follow rugby say that this is known as a sort of little loophole in the laws. But actually, it's really easy should take you 5 minutes to work out how you're going to play through it. And England, because they were so regimented under Eddie Jones, couldn't do it till half time. And then they suddenly score a load of tries quickly in the second half because Eddie Jones had told them what to do. And it felt a bit like that. The team going, this should be really easy, but oh God, what do we do? It doesn't make any sense. There's all this space, but we can't use it somehow. And when they do get a chance, their heads are so scrambled they can't actually hit the target anyway. So I can't remember how I started this point, but I think what I was building to say is this Chelsea are not a team yet who are capable of thinking on their feet, and that is a concern. Whereas apart from Cole Palmer, who just seems to be like, "What are you doing? Just this is obvious. Just do it." And I think he could end up, because of that, I think he could end up being a really valuable player for Chelsea this season, because he's the one whose head seems to be in the right place.
Yeah, with that in mind, George, who do Oddschecker think is going to win the Six Nations next year? Right.
I'm not going to dig that with a response.
Yeah, we're talking about Cole Palmer, but I've got the combined 11 here in front of me, and Cole Palmer is not in the combined 11. It's
do we think he'll get in the England squad today?
No. Too soon.
I mean, there's a lot of talent in those areas. I think you have to do something spectacular to get in. What's Sterling to go to the Euros?
Well, I guess Maddison is possibly injured, isn't he? Sterling's 11 to 10, so basically a coin toss.
I can't see any new faces being in this squad this close to the tour.
Well, it's just to they need somebody to replace Maddison. So maybe Sterling's form's been good enough this season to get him back in. Although he hasn't been picked for a squad since the World Cup, and you do wonder whether that going home after the burglary, whether that sort of has affected his standing.
Yeah, well, let's look at the combined 11. Then it's an old-fashioned 4-4-2 for who scored. We've got Ederson in goal, a back four of Kyle Walker, Thiago Silva, Akanji, and Gvardiol. Then Foden, Rodri, Gallagher, and Doku is the midfield four, and it's Alvarez and Haaland up top. Right then, predictions for this one. Then Chelsea against Manchester City. I'll go first, and I've gone big. I've gone for Chelsea 0, Manchester City 3. Jonathan,
1-0 to City.
1-0 to City, and George.
4-1 to City.
4-1 to City. That's a bold prediction as well. Right, let's look at the rest of our predictions now, and we'll start with the Wolves v Tottenham game, which is the first game this weekend. George?
Yeah, I've got Wolves 1 and a depleted Spurs 1.
I was very close to going for that score, but I've gone for 2-1 to Tottenham. Jonathan?
I did go for 1-1.
1-1 as well. Arsenal, Burnley, Jonathan?
2-0 Arsenal.
2-0. I've gone for 4-1 to Arsenal. George?
3-1 Arsenal.
3-1 Arsenal. Palace v Everton.
1-1.
1-1. I've gone for 2-1 to Everton. Jonathan?
I've gone for 1-0 to Palace.
1-0 to Palace.
Wow.
Different predictions this week. Manchester United against Luton. Jonathan?
2-0 to United.
I've gone 2-1 United, but I'm not sure on that though. George?
Yeah, I hate it. 1-0 United.
1-0 to United. We've already done Bournemouth against Newcastle. West Ham against Forest, George.
2-1 West Ham.
2-1 West Ham. I've gone 1-1.
1-0 West Ham.
Liverpool, Brentford, Jonathan.
2-1 Liverpool.
3-1 Liverpool here. George.
2-0 Liverpool.
2-0 Liverpool. Villa v Fulham, George.
1-0 Villa.
1-0 Villa. I've gone for 3-1 to Villa. Cannot keep a clean sheet. Jonathan.
1-0 Villa.
Brighton against Sheffield United, Jonathan.
2-0 to Brighton.
2-0 to Brighton. 3-0 to Brighton here. George.
Also 3-0.
3-0 to Brighton. A few different predictions there from the three of us. I might see the table change ever so slightly.
What's everyone's best picks?
Yeah, so we've got our best picks this week in association with Odds Checker. I'll go first. I picked an away win, and I've gone with one of my predictions. I've gone for Everton to win at Palace, which I'm imagining might boost the odds considerably.
I've gone for Villa to beat Fulham. You'll be happy to hear, Dan.
Yeah, rightly so. Jonathan?
That was what I was about to say, but instead I'll say Arsenal to beat Burnley.
And Arsenal to beat Burnley. We came very close to winning last week. It was just Dan's pick of Tottenham that let us down for our treble. This time around, it is a 5.02 to 1. So 5-1 treble. That's best price with BetMGM and BetUK. On Odds Checker, the lowest price is 4.13 to 1. So you're getting nearly a whole point better off by checking out the best price for Yaka.
Interesting. We've run out of time to do our team in focus this week. It was going to be Sheffield United, but George has got to run. So we'll do that next week. We'll have a little look at Sheffield United. We spent a long time, obviously, on the Eddie Howe subject at the start of the show, which was an interesting chat, in my opinion. Thanks to everyone who's going to tune in and watch. We really, really appreciate it. If you are watching and you're not subscribed, could you please do that and get your post notifications on as well, so you know when the next Edge of the Box is coming. Leave us a comment as well with your thoughts on what we've said in the show. Where does Eddie Howe rank in the top 5 Premier League managers? Give the video a like as well if you're feeling generous. International break, so we won't be back next week, but if you do get those post notifications on, as I say, you'll know when the next show is coming out. There's other content going up on the YouTube channel as well through the weeks. Enjoy the Premier League football this weekend and tell all your friends and family about the podcast.